I've had the experience of going out clubbing in the city I live near, and a white guy came up to me and said, "Oh, hey, my N word," and I was like, "Oh, me? I'm your girl."
Is this bitch serious?
Hello, it's Kyra, and thank you for joining me for another video. I hope you had a really great week. So, fun fact, I actually did a degree in linguistics, a double major and a minor actually. Linguistics, English literature, and a minor in education. So, I have a bit of a history with understanding the science of language. As soon as I finished my first year at university, I was able to be introduced to so many other aspects of linguistics that really blew my mind. And some of those things were things like historical linguistics, sociolinguistics, educational linguistics, change and development of the English language, and these aspects of linguistics were actually way more interesting to me than the technical ones like morphology and syntax, but they were important to learn anyway. So I have always been fascinated with the idea of language and how we use it in everyday life. And one of the things that I found really interesting has been the use of the N word and just how complicated it is for all of us, because who should use the N word? Should anybody be using it? Should it really be used exclusively by people from the black community? There are so many questions, and it's something that's been on my mind for a little while, and I wanted to talk to you about it today. As you may or may not have known from my accent, I'm from a country in the Caribbean named Trinidad and Tobago. This here is our national flag, or at least a version of it that I thought was kind of interesting. And it's interesting coming from a country that is actually quite close to America and seeing how America has influenced certain aspects. It's not a word that I grew up hearing, it's not a word that was normal to hear in the context of black people referring to other black people, but it's become a bit more popularized in more recent times, at least among people in my generation. But it's a word that I personally have never been in the habit of using because of the historical context of the N word. The same way it was used in the United States, it was used in my country of Trinidad and Tobago. So we do have that negative history with the N word, and therefore I have that negative history with the N word. So it still makes me feel uncomfortable to use it as casually as some African Americans might use it, or other black people from my country. The interesting thing about the use of the N word, though, is that it's not for everybody to use. It's a word that people who are black can use, but really we have a lot of discomfort around anybody who's non-black using it. It doesn't really matter what variety of non-black you are, you're just not allowed to use it, especially if you're white, because of history. We know that this was a word that was used and weaponized against black people. So the use of the N-word within the in-group, but by nobody in the out-group, is kind of unique, at least in my experience, my very limited linguistic experience. Normally, a word might change over time, and therefore it gets used by everybody in a particular way, and the original use of the word would go away as it's been co-opted and it's now being used in this way. Instead, the African American community and the rest of the African diaspora has adopted the word into our lexicon, and we use it to refer to black men, and then we don't let anybody else use it. Normally, when a word goes through some type of significant linguistic change, the way the N word has within the black community, this would be broadened out, and over time, everybody would begin to use that word in the same way, and therefore the negative meaning that it used to have is no longer relevant. But the black community as a group seems to generally think that The word needs to be used by us and by nobody else. Outside of that, it's very disrespectful. And as a student of linguistics, I find that to be a bit different from other cases. For better or for worse, I'm not quite sure. It's just not the typical case. And there's a word that we used to use quite recently, and it used to have a negative meaning, and it's now changed, and that word is queer.
If you say so.
Throughout time, the word queer was used to refer to anything that was odd or strange, and then it eventually began being used to refer to anybody who was not straight and not cisgender. So the word was adopted in the 80s and has been reclaimed by the community in large part. And most of us are quite comfortable with the word being used to encapsulate the entire group because the LGBT plus community is actually much larger than just LGBT, and nobody wants to be a plus. You have to factor in lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgender, non-binary, asexual. There are so many different groups within the LGBT plus community that putting these people LGBT at the front and then putting everybody else in a plus isn't really fair. So the word queer has been used in a way to encapsulate everybody. It's an umbrella term, and most people within the LGBT plus community are okay with the word queer. There are still people within the community who really do not like to be referred to as queer, which is understandable because the word did have a really negative history up to maybe one generation ago. But once the word was reclaimed and the word has been changed, most of us are pretty okay with it. There are different people who have different feelings, as I said. But the majority of us have no problem with you calling us queer. I mean, look at the name of my channel. So I'm perfectly fine with it. And I think most people are perfectly fine with you calling them queer if they're part of that community and you're using it in the way that you're referring to LGBT plus people. We understand if you say the queer community or queer people, you're talking about us. You're not calling us queer. There's a difference. So while queer used to be used as an insult, within about a generation or two, it no longer is. Calling an LGBT person queer is not really going to offend most of them anymore. So I think that the power of that word has now been stripped away. I think with the N word, that power is still there because it's only halfway been reclaimed, at least in my estimation as a novice linguist. It feels to me like within the confines of the group it's been reclaimed, but until it's generalized and popularized, I feel as if only half the work has been done.
Okay, and what do you want me to do about that?
When I've tried to express this to other black people in the past, I feel as if my view has not been accepted, which is understandable. If this is the way things have been for a long time, where black people have been using the N-word exclusively within their group, I think it's very uncomfortable for them to now consider the idea of, I guess, giving it to everybody else and letting people use it the way they use it. I could understand that discomfort. I mean, I've been called every name in the book after I've expressed this idea to other black people. They've said that I'm an Uncle Tom. They've said that I'm a coon. They said that I'm anti-black. They've said that I don't like myself. They've said that I want to let white people call me the N-word and that that's wrong and that I need to fix that and I need to work on that. And it's really not that I want anybody to be using the N-word in that negative way. I want everybody to use it in the way that black people have been using it so that the stigma attached to the word is no longer there. But I do understand this stance of saying we don't want to allow anybody who's non-black, especially anybody who's white, to use the word. I understand where that comes from. But I feel at the same time there is utility in allowing other people to use it in the way that we use it so that the language changes over time. But that's just my opinion. In general, most black people are quite comfortable with keeping the word within the community, and they don't really want to let anybody else use the word. It's almost like linguistic gatekeeping. I think it's a really interesting phenomenon that I've never quite seen before, but I understand why they have those views. I understand the feelings behind not wanting other people to have that power. But at the same time, I do think that there is something to be gained by depowering the word.